Our world seemed behind the world at large in terms of the way it treated women and artists of color.
We would just put these things up, and suddenly all hell broke loose.
Get your banana. Thank you very much.
Yes,
Welcome to the Changemaking Studio. I'm Yasmin Khan, your host curator, guiding you through the Museum of Truth and Lies. In this section, we'll meet one of the Guerilla Girls, the feminist artist collective who have championed the representation of women artists in galleries around the world since the 1980s. I'll also be in conversation with Frances Morris to harness her wisdom as a previous director of Tate Modern. First, let's hear from Frida Kahlo, one of the founding members of the Guerilla Girls. So should visitors always believe what they see in museums?
no. The art is always about questioning and about knowledge, and it's all speculative. I wouldn't say that museums lie so much as oftentimes they hide the truth, they ignore the truth, they mislead, or they don't realize it. It's not important to them. But we should all go to museums with a critical eye and a critical mind.
What stories do you think are missing or have yet to be told?
Well, one thing we've been interested in, especially since the Whitechapel show when we first met you, is the lives of artists, and in particular, male artists. Sexual assault and violence and sexual content has been a part of Western art from the very beginning. And that's not to moralize on it and be prudish about it. It's just a fact. And most of that is, a sexual obsession with female bodies and the male gaze. And also, many artists who are propped up in the marketplace have behaved badly. If they were politicians, they wouldn't be in office. What is it about our culture that in some discrete way values and rewards bad behavior among artists? All I have to do is bring up Picasso or Lucian Freud, as perfect examples of that. And if you dig into art history, some of those masters led pretty dodgy lives. And it's not to say their work should not be shown because of that, but it should be shown in addition to that information. We should know that, and it helps us understand the prevalence of sexual violence in our culture right now. It didn't come out of nowhere.
Over to Frances Morris at Tate Modern. Do you think museums should still strive to be neutral?
They were never neutral.
So that was a fallacy in of itself.
Of course. They were a construct of a particular society at a particular time with particular values, and they come out of, they're all basically Enlightenment models. They have the same structures that underpin our major institutions in this country. They're neoliberal institutions. They were built by men, mostly for kind of patriarchal power structures. The history that was written within those comes from the early 18th century, so it's based on cultures of empire. It's all coming tumbling down now. So I think it's really important for all of us in museums, and I love museums, to understand that we came from a place that has shaped us, and we're now in a different place. So that's where the tension lies, that actually we're not the ideal culture for the cultural organisations that serve us.
So society has changed and museums perhaps are struggling to catch up. Do you think that a fundamental pivot should be factual accuracy rather than public spectrum of ideology and opinion?
It has to be a conversation between the two. I mean, what is a fact? Even facts are culturally constructed, or the facts you choose. I mean, in a way, what's interesting about, truth is all about how you use your facts. The genius of the Guerilla Girls is that they pretty much stick with the facts, and they're anonymous. So they're not, they're avoiding that, she would say that because that's who she is. And the facts are very, very clearly observable facts. You can go into the Metropolitan Museum and count the number of naked women on the walls. You can do exactly what the duties did.
back to Frida Kahlo on why artists need freedom of expression. Thinking about the role of the artist in the future, what role can they play to resist?
Well, I think all artists need to resist the censorship of a few artists because none of us are free unless all of us are free. Here in the United States, shows have been canceled and people have been fired. And that is a really disturbing development. And we all need to figure out how to take that on and counter it. Because if one artist is censored, we all could be censored.
Absolutely. And thinking about your portfolio of artworks, was there ever a time where you were told you crossed the line and it just wasn't, it was ripped down or sort of deleted? Like, did you have those pressures upon yourself?
Well, a lot of American museums are a little more coy than that, or arts organizations as well, are very, our most famous poster, "Do Women Have to Be Naked to Get into the Metropolitan Museum of Art?" was something we did in response to a request from the Public Art Fund, which is a big fund in New York that supports art in public places. They asked us to do a billboard back in 1989, and we came up with that. We went to the Metropolitan Museum, counted the naked women in artworks, we counted the number of women artists, and we came up with this crazy thing, that women had to be naked to get into the museum. When we submitted the proposal to the Public Art Fund, instead of really censoring us, they sent it back to us and said, "We would like you to work on this a little bit more because it's not exactly clear to us what it's about." It was pretty obvious to us that they didn't want to criticize an institution in public, but they had their very discreet way of not censoring us, but asking us to please develop it a little bit more.
And did you comply?
No. We went ahead and we rented advertising space on the buses of New York. So instead of being a billboard in one place, our Get Naked poster was introduced to the public 24/7 riding around on a bus.
So clearly, artists play a vital role in speaking truth to power through creative interventions exhibited in museums. But is anyone formally responsible for holding museums to account when it comes to truthful storytelling?
You mean like an Ofsted for museums? Well, there is an Ofsted for museums. It's the DCMS. Museums don't act with independence. So national museums sign a 2-year contract with the DCMS, and it's based on the Museums and Galleries Act of 1992. And therefore, a lot of what museums do is they're working to an agenda set by the government. And if they don't meet the demands of the government or the requests of the government, they will not receive their percentage of the DCMS budget. So it's pretty contractual. There is the arm's length thing, so that museum's trustees sign that on behalf of the museum. So in the end, the responsibility lies with the trustees who are appointed by the government to ensure that museums carry out their mission statements. That only works if there's a consensus within the institution that goes from the very most junior member of staff to the most senior, that everybody buys into that vision, which is why museums work so hard to bring their staff on board, and not always successfully.
That's interesting. And obviously, as a cultural leader, you've played a pivotal point in building consensus as previous director of Tate Modern.
Yeah.
Could you say a bit more about how you went about building consensus when there might have been some dispute over the portrayal of a certain storyline in a gallery?
Those situations are very difficult to resolve, but I think building curatorial consensus over curatorial narratives is one thing. And that is relatively straightforward to do if you believe in bringing everybody into the conversation, at least at some level, and then working to resolve differences of opinion. And there are always differences of opinion over the minutiae of interpretation. But if most people are brought into the conversation about the bigger part of the program, what are we going to do? Why are we going to do it? So I always saw it as my role to be incredibly honest and straightforward about why we were making certain decisions, and to be very frank about that you were making those decisions on the basis of what you believe in, but tempered by the realities of the institution and the context in which you were putting your program out, so that certain decisions had to be made as opposed to other decisions because of all the complexity, really, but that everybody had a voice and was able to express their thoughts. But I think the difficulty I always found was when a decision was taken in the institution that was not taken by me, or that I was not party to, and then having to defend that for my team. So directors do a lot of work in trying to help their teams and their colleagues understand why an institution might take certain decisions. And of course, the risk is that then an individual will fundamentally disagree with that decision and will decide to take action. I had only one example of that during my time at Tate was when a senior curator disagreed with a decision we had made on the timing of an exhibition, and felt very strongly that the decision would impact badly on themselves and their reputation. And I reflect a lot on that and what I could have done to have averted that. And the only thing I can think of is that I should have brought them into the conversation earlier.
Do you think museums are doing a good enough job of conveying truthful narratives?
It's hard to make that generalization because some museums are doing better than others. The Tate Modern and in many cases the Tate Britain are doing a great job. Is the Museum of Modern Art in New York doing a good job? I'm not sure. Is the Whitney Museum doing a great job? I'm not sure. American museums are run with the money of American industrialists, and with that comes all kinds of conflicts in terms of what to show, how to show it, who funds the show, and what cannot be shown.
What do you think is the most important piece of information to accompany an artwork?
I think that depends on the artwork. I think the date is important, the artist is important, how it came to be in the museum, and also why the museum thinks it's significant enough to exhibit.
Do you think fossil fuel sponsorship threatens to jeopardize truth-telling in museums?
Well, it's interesting. I think any connections that institutions have with funding bodies that somehow compromise their integrity in relation to what they're doing is a problem. The charge of hypocrisy is never very far away. I think it's a very, very important. I think AI will lay bare. The scrutiny of institutions will become much, much more real in a situation where everything is, you can dig out everything. So I think museums need to be incredibly careful about their funding, because even if I know that, for example, the British Museum, I know that £50 million is hugely significant to get them over the line in terms of their new building, but it may just be seen as too high price to pay in the longer run. When you look at what's happened to this Tory government with the endless misdemeanours, the endless U-turns, the creep of dishonesty, corruption, all of us in positions of responsibility have to scrutinise our own behaviour, because any crack in that will be instrumentalised by those playing a part in the culture wars.
So what is the big change the Guerilla Girls are striving for?
Well, in the United States, we need more female museum directors and museum directors of color. It's really been a white man's world for a long time, and that really needs to change. And if it changes from the top down, if it starts to change from the top down, it can also change from the bottom up. Our idea is the more our work gets out there, and it's pretty clear what it's about, it's pretty confrontational, it's pretty direct. The more places it's seen, the better for us, because it all adds up to transforming people's thinking about art.
I've always thought, let's work with this artist because something important will happen. you understand what the artist can do for you. You want to be challenged. One of the interesting things about the Guerilla Girls was that, in the early years, I think they were amazed that museums wanted to invite them in to tell them how badly they were doing. But what they don't realise is that, or what they didn't realise is, that when you're a curator in an institution, you are behaving consensually, but of course there are things you disagree with profoundly. But within that context, it's not going to be effective to speak out, or, you can challenge the consensus, but only to a degree. But real institutional change needs a bigger boulder. And so bringing in someone like the Guerilla Girls, they could say what you can't say. They could say it, and they can do it with humour, but they can be really tough.
What piece of advice would you give to the next generation of artists and curators?
Well, tell the whole story, not part of the story. Be courageous, and don't take no for an answer.
What advice would you give to the next generators of curators when it comes to truth-telling?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? Truth-telling is such a big thing, isn't it? First of all, what are the important truths to tell?
What are the important truths to tell?
What are the important truths to tell? Are you the right person to be telling them? Is the right audience listening? And remember that you are effectively working with a medium that is a medium about storytelling. So who's telling the story? Is it you, or is it the objects in your care?
Thanks for visiting the Museum of Truth and Lies. Join me on the next gallery tour of this limited edition series from wherever you get your podcasts. You can find out about the making of this museum in the online Museen, an artist-illustrated magazine packed with playful tools and games, lovingly co-created with Sold Out Publishing. Tell us your thoughts and share your museum photos using the hashtag MuseumTruthLies.